Hey everyone, I'm Megan Rose Dickey. I'm a reporter with Techcrunch. And today we are going to talk about robotics. I know you guys were thinking about diversity, but that's just not going to happen right now. So, Charles, what's the best robotics company out there right now?
I have one in my portfolio, so I probably shouldn't pick that one. Huh?
Okay.
That's a little self-serving.
All right, well, I was just kidding. We were going to talk about diversity. So, all right, so let's just jump right in. Recently, there have been some VC funds that have come out with diversity-focused funds. I'm wondering why we're starting to see that right now, and if that's the right thing to do. Oh. Yeah, maybe Christine, just because 500 startups recently announced one.
Okay. So you were asking about there's starting to be a lot more. I don't know if it's a lot, but there are
maybe
starting
like
to
one.
be maybe one, a couple.
One to be exact.
I mean, generally, I think that at least the firms that I'm aware of that are starting these, I guess, quote unquote, like if it's a fund to invest in underrepresented founders or businesses targeting that customer segment. Generally, I know that for some folks, it's not necessarily seen as positive in terms of I don't want to be invested in by a fund that only funds like a certain founder. But I guess my take is that, and because we do have a fund that is one of our funds that is going to be doing that, I actually see it as a great step in the right direction in terms of money is being put into very talented founders who unfortunately don't necessarily get viewed in the same lens by Silicon Valley VCs or by VCs in general. So can understand why some folks might not like the idea of it, but I think that's a great step, as well as just VCs in general opening their eyes up to founders that don't look like the typical founder or are targeting customer segments that are foreign to them, like an African-American consumer or Spanish-speaking, the Spanish-speaking consumer or whatever it is. It's, hopefully it's going in the right direction, I guess, yeah.
Something that I wonder, though, is should VC firms not just make a point to invest in underrepresented founders? Like, do we really need a separate fund, or are we just not there yet? And anyone can feel free to chime in.
So I think we've done this long enough. It's high time we mainstream the entire gender thing. The diversity thing needs to be mainstreamed. Over the last 4 years, I have specifically through my nonprofit gone and invested in women entrepreneurs, global women entrepreneurs, to bring more diversity into what we're doing. I believe that for any fund, not only somebody who's looking at a success rate of founders, any investment fund that wants to increase success rate needs to look at diversity as a very, very important function of the fund. It is a huge parameter. I completely believe in the Medici effect, which means that the more diverse founders you have, the better portfolio you're making, the better ideas because perspectives are different, the better ROI because things that haven't been thought of in a certain culture is being thought of in another culture, in another perspective, in another history. I think all these things together is what makes entrepreneurship, which is really an experiment, right? It makes it more effective. And ultimately, the more diverse ideas that come forth, the more diverse solutions to those ideas, the better performance, the better new ways of doing the same thing.
I mean, I guess the only thing I'd say is we have 30 years of data on what happens if you don't do anything differently and you don't get different people. So, I mean, I struggle with the same thing that Christine mentioned, which is sometimes people ask me, how many founders of color have you backed? And how many women? And I'm always a little hesitant to go down that road because I don't want the founders I've backed to think that they only got money from me so that I could increase some diversity number that I could tweet out and make people feel like I'm doing something cool. So I think there's some sensitivity around that. But I think we've seen what happens if you don't try new things or encourage a different set of people. And if having a fund focused on a set of people sends a signal to that community that, hey, you're valued and welcome here and we want to hear from you, I think that it's worth trying something different.
Right. And Charles, I would imagine that you're kind of in a tough position. There are very few African American VCs, and there are very few venture-backed founders of color. Do you feel like you have a responsibility to change that? Or, and you were kind of saying this, that, I mean, you kind of don't really like to go down that that road with how many people of color are you backing and whatnot. But how do you, I don't know, what's your thought process around that? Or do you feel a responsibility?
I definitely feel a responsibility to meet with more people than I probably would. I think, there's certainly some people of color in my portfolio. I've given them the benefit of the doubt in the same way I've given everyone else the benefit of the doubt in the portfolio. I worked at a larger firm. I have friends that work at larger firms. I think this stuff is a lot easier to do when it's your firm or it's like one person, because then you don't have a committee, you don't have other people to convince, like it's your decision making. And I think sometimes when you're the only man of color or woman of color in your fund, there's this weird thing that can happen where the person who looks like you comes in and you're like, well, if I say yes, are the people that I work with going to think that I'm like giving this person, doing a solid for this person? And what happens if it doesn't work out? Am I going to get it to, you can get in this really weird head game. And like that goes away, I think, when you have your finger on the button.
So Meera, I know that through your foundation, you only back female founders. I'm wondering what the returns have been like that, in that.
Too early to comment, because the criteria for investment has been not only diverse groups of female founders, that means female founders as far as Africa. But also two other things that we count on is, number one, we have enough resources where we're investing to support them. And the second is that they do end up creating a social impact around them that makes them role models for other women to come forward and become a part of a society, a community that helps grow our vision, which is more financial inclusion for women. So I think given these two factors of impact, our return on investment is measured as a part of these two, and not really how much money they will end up making. But of course, financial inclusion is a huge part. 30% is the fact that they will end up making money by the end of 3 years, and we'll be able to help them raise more money through our network after that to sustain their businesses.
And what are the diversity conversations like at Germanium Ventures? Do they exist?
They do exist because it's a woman-driven initiative, and I started this initiative when I was in the Middle East, working with local companies. So definitely these are conversations we have, but ultimately I think for a profit-driven venture, who is the founder becomes less important in a while. We like to open up the funnel to more diverse founders, but ultimately the gender or background doesn't matter as long as the company does well.
Got it. And I think a lot of times when, well, less so recently, but when people talk about diversity, women, but we have women, so like, yes, we're thinking about diversity. But I guess, Christine, I'll just throw this to you. When 500 Startups thinks about diversity, what does that really mean? Like, what are you looking at exactly?
I think when we consider diversity, I guess for us it's very important that it's kind of holistic throughout everything we do. It's not just like, oh, we kind of like what Charles is saying, oh, we have this many founders of color or this many LGBT founders. It's like, I also kind of sometimes have the same reaction. It's such a common thing. People want to brag about it, say, look at how diverse we are. But then I always feel sort of like, well, I mean, I feel conflicted saying that too, because it's like, I don't want it just makes us look good, like it's a trophy case. And that's really not what we believe in. Like when we think about diversity in terms of our investments, which is very, very high priority for us, obviously, as a fund, we look very closely at not just the gender or race or sexual orientation of the founders or even nationality. I mean, that's a big part of it. It's also like what kind of businesses they are building, who are the customers they're targeting, and that there is obviously some overlap there with what I said about the founders. Like there could be founders that are building businesses targeted at audiences that may not be familiar to some of us on the investment team. Like Maven is probably a great example. Or a company in our current batch called Rojo, which is a kind of a sermon, okay. Oh, perfect, yeah. So it's interesting. I will talk about Rojo as an example. That they target primarily the African American. Their customers are obviously like African American, but the thing about that company that I actually was a bit hesitant on was like, it touches religion, and I think Silicon Valley is very weird about religion. Obviously, it's
Right.
Don't talk about it. But one of our venture partners had found this deal. That was my kind of like hesitation. Like, I'm not sure if it's a good idea for us to be investing in a religious company, whatever religion it is. And then she said, well, talk to the founder. It's for African Americans, it's a big part of the identity, and just try it out, right? So I actually met with the founder. They're now in our current batch in San Francisco, and I have to say, having that conversation with him was eye-opening, because it's just not something that comes to mind, because when you think about race and religion, like for some groups, it's a big part of their identity. It doesn't mean they're not. Saying that every Christian is like the Westboro Baptist Church is kind of like saying every Muslim is ISIS. Like it's actually not true, but that's sort of like the perception that we have. And I think if we think about diversity, we should be considering all, like, it's not just gender. I hear a lot of folks saying, well, we're going to try to get women, and then we'll see what other diversity comes up, as if it's like this checkbox, right? It's like it's not just one. Diversity isn't just one thing, right? It's even age. Age is a huge thing. So
Right.
investments, looking at who we hire, our team. There's sometimes we have these conversations about going into other markets, and where diversity or that kind of concept is not quite as, it's a little earlier. So there's all these jokes about we have to send in the tall white guy to raise money there because they're not going to take a meeting with a woman. Those are tougher. Like those aren't easy. There's no easy solution there. But for us, like I think it's important when you talk about like what does it mean, like diversity mean for a fund, that it isn't just like skewed into this one little thing. It should be like, if you really care about it, and you should, if you want to make more money, I think people forget that you can make more money this way, that it has to be kind of in your DNA for it to be actually be authentic.
Right, and so yeah, you were mentioning, it's not only gender, but it's sexuality, it's religion, it's age, it could even be height. So I'm wondering, it could be, I don't know, some people call me a little shorty, and I feel some biases, but how do you take into account intersectionality, so just the ways that those identities are intersecting?
Is that for me?
Yeah, sure.
So I think a lot of biases stem from, media, society, like the 400-pound hacker did. So from a lot of those things, a lot of what you hear around you. I think I've had I've raised money and done ventures over 3 continents. And in every continent, it's been a different ballgame. I raised a $1 billion fund in Middle East, and I didn't face the bias that a woman of my color would face, brown, would face here. It was easy. It was really easy being a woman in the Middle East because you got all the meetings, you got the top guys coming to meet you. It's different here. It's difficult getting your foot through the door. So I think even those biases differ regionally, where you come from and who you're talking to, and then the straighter the society you want to go talk to. So I think it's a complicated issue. It's not an issue that we could just put in a report and say we got 30% LGBT or we got 30% women, and we are diverse and we're great. What are these people doing? How much of your productivity as a company are they contributing to? It's not a human resource problem, it's a cultural problem.
Yeah, and something that has been touched on is just actually reporting these types of numbers and feeling like, okay, like, yes, like, look, we're releasing our numbers, like, we're not, like, we're doing the right thing. But I guess I feel like it can be a bit of a double-edged sword in a way. Like, either you release your numbers and someone's going to find something wrong with them. I probably will. I'll probably write about it, and I do. But then if you don't release them, then I wonder, well, why haven't you released them? What are you trying to hide? All of that. So, yeah, can you just tell me, or the thing behind that? And maybe, Charles, I'll just put this to you because, you know, Precursor Ventures is pretty new. And
I mean, I told the investors in my fund my goal was minimum 25% of the companies will be female founded and led, 25% people of color, 50% everything else. And, you know, I didn't want to have hard ceilings, but I thought given the kinds of entrepreneurs that come through the door, I wanted them to have a yardstick to hold me accountable. And it's if I only find and I'm above sort of what my targets were, but I wanted to have a yardstick where if I had a 10% female founder ratio, my LPs would come to me and say, hey, you told us coming into this that this was important to you. You're well below it. And there's a couple reasons. It could be like, hey, I didn't meet as many great female founders as I thought I would, or it could be pause and reflect. Maybe I'm not, you know, making the right decisions, but I thought it was important. And I'll be honest, not all of my investors care. Some of them are like, I really don't care. This is important to you, so fine. But I have a few who really do when they ask me, like, hey, we noticed like this quarter, 4 of the 5 were female. Like, what happened? I'm like, I don't know. I happened to meet them this quarter and think they were awesome. Next quarter, it could be 0. But I think it's important if you don't have some baseline expectation, and I feel like in startup land, if you can't find 1 in 4 teams that's led and founded by a woman at the stage where I invest, then you should really look at like who's coming in your office and whether you're getting kind of good coverage of quality people. And I thought that was a reasonable starting point.
got it. Well, I think we have to wrap up, but thank you everyone for your time.
Thank you.
Thank our panelists. Great job. I'm mic'd up.